Well, it's time. Well, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us on Medium Day. And today we are going to talk about why poetry should feel like a punch to the gut. And basically, we have noticed that when we write a poem and we give it to someone else to read, we don't want to hear that it was nice or that it was cute because that's the worst possible feeling. Imagine you write with your heart and someone tells you that it was nice. And that's terrible. So what we want is for poetry to be moving, to break your heart, if possible, to destroy you. But we mean it in a good way. We want to elicit certain emotions. And that's basically what we're going to discuss. How can we as writers achieve that? And to talk about this, here we have um, Lindsay Soberano Wilson and Antonio Dugan, who, with me, GB Rugged, we are co editors at iPoetry, a Medium publication. So now I'm going to ask Lindsay to please tell us a little bit about herself.
Hi, everybody. Yes, my name is Lindsay Sobrano Wilson, and I joined Medium around 3 years ago. And I really gravitated to iPoetry, to the emotional writing, and Gabby's work with the publication. So I joined there. I've been on Medium for about 3 years. And I also founded a smaller publication, a mental health publication, Put It to Rest. And lastly, I wanted to share that I recently published a book of poetry, Hoods of Motherhood, with the publisher Prolific Pulse Press. And so I'm happy to be here to talk about what we love about poetry.
Okay. Okay, now please, Anthony, tell us something about yourself.
Hello, I'm Anthony O'Dugan. I am a co-editor at iPoetry. I've been on Medium since December 2020, I believe, and I started writing as part of like an exploration of myself. Really, I had a bunch of stuff going on that I had to get out, and I didn't really know how. And iPoetry was a place that I could come as a writer to do that. But when I was invited to come on as an editor, I got to see people from all around the world express the same kinds of things I'd been feeling. So it brings a sense of belonging just from reading these words and interacting with people and developing these relationships through the love of words. And that's why I'm here for poetry. And I'm really excited. So.
Thank you very much. And well, about me, I'm GB Rogut, and I'm Mexican, by the way. And right now, I'm speaking to you from my colorful Mexican border town, and I have been on Medium since 2018, I think, and I have written about several topics from relationships, mental health, sexuality, even nutrition, I believe. And I have been calling myself a reluctant poet because when I came to Medium, I did not expect to write about this, but one good day it just happened that I wrote a poem, and then I was writing two, three, four, and then I created this publication called I Poetry that was supposed to be just a phase, but now it has been many years, and thankfully many followers and many writers who have joined us, and that makes me very happy. So that's me. And now we're gonna start discussing our topic. By the way, if you have a question, there is a chat. You can see it there. That's where you can write any questions you have. And at the end, we're gonna try to answer as many as possible. Okay. Okay. To begin, we're gonna start with what strategies can writers use to ensure that their poems really connect to the readers. Lindsay, would you begin?
Yes, so I think similarly to what was already said, we really strongly believe in poetry that moves you, right? That has an emotional connection and appeal. And so it tells a story, right? A poem, we really believe on iPoetry, especially, that a lot of the poems shall tell a story, and a lot are lyrical in nature. The other thing I want to say is I think a lot of us or can appreciate a good twist at the end, right? You're following a whole poem, you think you know the tone, and then you're kind of punched in the gut, as we say, right? And there's that twist. So I think that's something we can really appreciate. I know, for instance, one poem I wanted to mention that I really love about Gabby's is one when numbness moves in, right? And she gives this kind of description of how she offers, sugar and cream and all these things, but no, and explains that you can't stay, but that numbness is, so comfortable there already. So I wanted to kind of share that example of how we can use those great metaphors to appeal to emotions. So that's my first few opinions on that.
Oh, thank you. Anthony, please.
So when I write, I'd like to think about what I want to say, but a lot of times I write for myself. So I can give you good advice on how to write for other people, but if one of those people is yourself, I mean, it's going to be a little bit different. So I say just write no matter what. And then if there's something there that you can get out and somebody can connect with, they'll find you. I mean, if you want to get into like, what do I want to say? Who would I want to say it to? You can do that. But I think to be able to do that well, you have to have the ability to kind of zoom in microscopically to feel and see all the details, but then zoom out so that you recognize that galaxies and galaxies away, there's all of this stuff that made us who we are. If you can pull all of that in and somehow bring your story, your relevance, your emotion in that moment to life, that's how you're going to connect with people. And if you're writing for yourself, you're a people too. So a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, you could have had the worst past. But if you were able to get through that and write and use that kind of as your salvation, you're going to love that as your future self looking back on those moments, especially if you practice your craft and get really good at saying exactly what you feel. There's no question what you feel. Other people are going to feel that too. Then you've got something.
I love that. Yeah, exactly. And for me, when I'm on Medium, something I really like to read about is screenwriting, of all things. And I had found that there are many principles of screenwriting that I end up applying to poetry and that they work. And especially they work to make the poem more appealing to the reader. For example, there is a principle called minimum words, maximum impact. Meaning, do not try to write a very long poem just because you think it has to be long, but rather carefully choose your words in a way that they really, like we said on the title of this session, they really punch the reader. Strong words. And another principle I like to apply is arrive late, leave early. Like when we watch a movie, we tend to see several scenes where in the movie they show us straight to the battle. Like, do not show us people driving the car and they getting out of the car and then walking to the battle. That's boring. Instead, go for it immediately. And sometimes when I'm editing poems for iPoetry, I notice that some of the writers, like, they take too long to get to the point. And the problem on Medium, of course, is that people were attracted to your poem because of the title, because of the picture, and then they start reading. And if they do not connect, they are going to go away. So before submitting your poem, before publishing, maybe consider if there is anything you can remove. It's going to hurt, but sometimes it's necessary. And on this way, you can assure that the reader is really going to connect fast. Because sadly, on the internet and on Medium, we have to fight against that. Like, the reader wants to find something that calls to them, and if it doesn't work in the first few lines, they are gone. So those two are some of the strategies that I would like writers to use, especially in our publication. Yeah, but I love what you really love what you say, Anthony, because yeah, so many people say do not write for yourself, but it's true. You are your first reader, definitely. Yeah, very well. On this same topic, um, when you are reading poems, whether it is on Medium, on iPoetry, or anywhere else, what do you think makes poetry feel dull? Lindsay?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm somebody who's always aware of those cliches and trying to avoid them. But the interesting thing I've found is because I'm a really big fan of wordplay, is that sometimes we can take that cliche and turn it on its head, and then it's kind of new and refreshing. So I would say, and I wrote this in one article for the Writing Cooperative, about how we should be aware of cliches and how they can be dull, but that at times they could be an opportunity for, making an idea fresh, turning something on its head, using that cliche, using it in a new way, and kind of surprising readers. So that's something I always think about. What about you, Anthony? What do you think?
Well, I can attest to the fact that you love wordplay and you're very good at it. When I read your stuff, like I feel the play and the dance. So certainly the opposite of dull. That's how you luster and bring magic to the words. Um, there's a fine line, I think, when you get into like really good poetry where you're not using words to fluff it up and puff it up. You're using them because you know what they mean and they really hit. They punch right away. You're not sitting here with this dance, you're punching. I'm looking at a piece right now, and I had loved this piece since I started reading it. This is from Sarah L. Harvey, and she wrote this piece called Let Awe Crackle in Your Mouth Like Stars. Just saying those words is just so absolutely beautiful. And dull is sometimes what you get in a run-of-the-mill Hallmark card. And if you kind of just put it into those things, it has its place. It certainly does, but they're in a Hallmark card. We want to read that stuff where it's like we've all, I think, at some point had our hearts ripped out or our souls ripped out, or just we've been through stuff, good, bad, whatever. That's where your poetry comes from. I haven't written in over a month. I haven't needed to. There's nothing that's coming out that I'm like, I'm not going to bring any love or joy to this. So dull is when you're writing kind of just to write. And it's not going to be great. It's not going to be awesome. It's kind of entry level. You have to do that. You have to go through the motions. But is it published worthy? Is it worth reading? Not necessarily. I'm a huge advocate. Just get it out anyway. You have to write a lot of shitty poetry before you get good poetry. I promise you, I've done it. But dull, you know it. You see it, you feel it, and you're like, okay, that's just a thing. You see a shiny coin in a pile of coins, that's good poetry. You see, like, okay, that feels like a card, happy birthday, get well, whatever. You can tell the difference.
Thank you. Yes, about that writing shitty poetry, I can say, and that might be the case for many of us. I have some notebooks that I wrote when I was, I don't know, in high school or in college. Luckily, they are lost forever and no one will have to suffer their contents. Wow, such a relief to know no one will ever read that because, wow, it was bad. But yeah, it's necessary to write that the shitty stuff to get to the good one, and the shitty stuff keeps happening. Nowadays I end up writing something that I say, no, this is not gonna see the light of day ever, but it's necessary. Yeah, no one can expect to all the time write uh, quality stuff that's not real.
Well, it's interesting too, because I think what Anthony was saying is sometimes we go through phases, right? And we can't always be in that writing phase, right? And it's true, when the writing seems more dull, go out and live, right? And I think a lot of us experience that when we know that right now we just need to live, right?
Yes, exactly. And more on the topic, I think many times is our word choice. Like sometimes I feel writers are afraid of choosing words they think are silly or they think they are dirty or something. And there is one of our writers, Michael Ritok, who I have always liked, and some and his poems I have seen him use words like whiny, mama, papa, words like people will say that that's a silly word that doesn't belong in a poem, but it does if you know how to use it, and that's something I think he has always done very very well, because in the end you cannot be writing as if someone is looking over your shoulder all the time, because that kind of pressure is not going to help you. So you just write what is good for the poem, and you include the words that work for the poem, and at the moment you don't worry about anything else. So I think that's part of it. Yes. By the way, I'm noticing people are writing questions. Yes, you can write it on the chat. Thank you very much. And we are going to try at the end to answer as many as possible. Okay. Now, to keep with the conversation, one of the issues writers have is self-censorship. So, Lindsay, have you had to deal with that, and what did you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think this topic is really interesting, right? Because the truth is, I find the way I stop censoring myself is to realize that sometimes not every poem is confessional. Not every poem is about me, right? And embracing that this poem is actually about a character, right? Maybe it's an exaggerated version of me. Maybe it's me on my worst day, when I should just go to bed, but I don't. And so I think it's interesting because sometimes people will comment, they'll say something like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, it's not always about the author. So I think that's one way to step out, right? To recognize that it's the voice, the poetic voice, and to realize that readers will see what they see in it, of course. So I find that that helps. But I do have to admit sometimes too, even when I have a character in my mind, sometimes if I share something very personal, sometimes I do step back. But that's what I love about poetry, that we can blend fiction, nonfiction, and get away with exploring a lot of emotions through metaphor.
Yes, Anthony? Yes. How do you deal with self-censorship?
It's tough. I mean, we're editors. I mean, that's why we're here. And yes, we edit other people's work, but I mean, we're also writers, so we have to edit our own work. When I'm writing, not poetry, but writing, I feel a little less confident for some reason, and I'll type a whole lot of stuff and then delete it. So it's not imposter syndrome as much as it's just like, yeah, this isn't good. Like this, I'm not really saying anything. Sometimes it happens with poetry, but my lesson in that is work through it and push through it. You can write a long piece and it might not all work, it might not all flow, but later when you're kind of just saying, I need to get into the feel of it, kind of like I need a good cry to open up my tear ducts, I need a good moment to get something out, you can pull from those lines, you can borrow from yourself. They're your words. I mean, they're everyone's words, but they're yours until you put them out there. So just get it out, just get it on paper. But if you give yourself the parameter to say it's okay no matter what, then you can really get out of that whole fix it and like, oh, I have to edit. And it was so hard for me because I'm a control freak and I have to know everything. Everything has to be perfect. There's no draft. Everything is just stamped immediately. And that's a lot of pressure to live up to. So you have to kind of let it go, let it out, and you'll be amazed at what happens. I mean, we've talked about it before. You got to get through a lot of the muck, but where do you think lotuses come from? You got to really work through that. So it's okay to just put it out there, no matter what comes out.
Thank you. Yes, what Lindsay was mentioning, I write sometimes poems about mental health, and I have had people send me the phone number for a suicide prevention hotline, which I appreciate because I understand there is very good intention behind them, but I have to say, don't worry, I'm okay. I just wrote this because I was sad, I was going through something, and I channel all of this in the poem. There are some poems that I truly was going through a very rough phase, but the poem was one of the many things that helped me deal with that. And there are other situations in which I I pretend I'm someone else, like there's a bit of acting even. And I say, a person who, if I were me, if I were this other person, how will this person write this poem? And it comes something. And I use it a lot. I also write erotic poetry sometimes, and I use it a lot then. And yeah, it's like maybe I cannot write this, but if I were someone else, maybe they will do it. So that has been helpful. And when we were discussing before the call about reading reading other writers, reading famous writers, or maybe not so famous, but who I enjoy, and I get inspiration from the kind of words they are using, their tone, and I feel like it makes me think of all the possibilities, things that I hadn't considered doing before. And one thing that has helped me also is the fact that I use a pen name. Like GB Rogut is not my real name. So the pen name has also uh, helped me feel safer when it comes to my writing. I guess it also has to do with this writing as someone else. And, and I get in this state that it's okay. Maybe the real me cannot say it, but GB Rogut can say it. And it's okay. And that helps me deal with that. Helps me be more courageous, I think. So yeah, that has helped. Okay. And uh, on the other on the other side of the coin, we have saying too much. Do you think is it possible for a writer to reveal too much of themselves? And what will be your advice, Lindsay?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm still struggling with that myself, right? I think all of us do. And sometimes I think it depends where we are at the time, what we're writing about. So I think at the end, to be honest, that it's a writer's call. You know what I mean? Did I say too much? Did I cross my line? And I think our readers will decide for us. You know what I mean? If we said too much and they don't like our kind of poetry, well, they're welcome not to come back, right? And I think those more people will appreciate when we say too much, right? For that human connection.
Yeah. Anthony, have you ever felt like you revealed too much, or what do you think?
Well, to piggyback off of something you said, I write erotic poetry too. So sometimes when I do that, I think, is that really how I am? And like, I think I am. I mean, but it's weird. You get in this weird place where you're almost like an avatar of yourself and you're kind of a little bit acting, but not really. But I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily possible. I mean, I think that's part of the journey. I mean, in a conversation that you're just meeting a stranger, can you say too much? Sure, but that would also be as strange as walking up and just talking poetry to somebody. That's really not a normal sort of thing. But if you're in poetry and you're in that space, I think you enter that space with a certain type of expectation that, hey, this is where some real stuff's going to happen. There's if it's good poetry, this is a revelation, and the more you can see of this person and the more you can see of yourself when you unfold, I don't even know if that's a possibility. Now, I misread this actually and thought, like, what is too much when you're writing? Not too much of a reveal, but what is too much? Like, you can get too lost in repetition, you get too lost in too much rhyme, stuff like that. So I mean, there's a way to look at it, but I did want to flip that real fast in the way I misinterpreted it, that too much isn't as bad as too little. If you don't reveal enough, it's kind of like, hey, there's no spark here. Like, make me fall in love, make me hurt, make me feel all the pieces of you, because I'm here. You've got my time, you've got my attention. Let me stare through the stained window glass of your soul, and I really want to read what you write. So people you find that are like that, you always want to pick them back up. And we've got tons of them at iPoetry. Anne Marie Steele, in fact, is in the chat. Is here popping up a lot. She's one that anytime she writes something, I got to be there and read it. So that's that.
Yes, it is. Yeah, for me, there's very little I would consider too much. Like, and in fact, sometimes I think being afraid is a sign that I'm finally allowing myself to be vulnerable, that I'm finally revealing something that is valuable for the reader. And yes, I suppose that as long as you are following the medium terms of service and guidelines, you should be okay. Like that's maybe that's the one thing you should consider when writing. But other than that, but I suppose it goes back to the pen name that I feel safe behind that. And I also feel like when I'm editing a poem, usually I can feel when the writer is holding back. Like they were going somewhere and suddenly they stop, and I can feel the shift in their perspective. And I think you're absolutely right, Anthony. Like that's worse. Like if you are all the time thinking, "Oh no, this is too much. This is dangerous. I'm afraid." It's okay to feel that way, but if you're gonna let it get in the way of your writing, in the long term, you're gonna start thinking, I have nothing to say. This is not good. This is not moving. And it's because you are holding back. So yeah, so to me, other than the medium terms of service, there's very little that can be considered like too much at this point. Okay, I'm noticing we have several questions. We're going to try to go through many of them as possible. For example, Lindsay Amy Culver is asking us, how much editing do you do on your poems?
Right. Well, I guess personally, it really kind of sometimes depends on the poem, right? I don't know. I mean, a lot of them kind of just come out. I think we all have that experience where the editing happens in the head sometimes, right? So that when the poem comes out, sometimes it's more complete. And then I feel personally, a lot of us have those poems that take longer to come out, right? And need more editing. So, yes, I say that it definitely changes from poem to poem.
Yes. And Anne Marie Steele is asking about, she feels like she's writing too much for the audience and it's not feeling authentic. And she's asking for advice to deal with that.
I think that's a problem that I have too. But I think the fix for it is to narrow the audience. I mean, if you're considering more than one person, that's probably where you're running into problems. And I think that's where the muse comes along. Write for one person, write for one person that you know is going to sync with that. And if you can get that feedback, that mirror sound feedback of what you're giving out there, that will make your words feel a lot better because you're sharing that with you're making that moment very intimate. Then if it expands by its own accord, well, there you go.
Thank you. And we have, hold on. I'm looking at the questions. Well, we had a comment here that I find interesting. Years ago, I wrote a short story in the genre of eroticism. I let 4 close friends read it on paper. While we were at lunch, they finished and said nothing. I said, what? Am I a bad writer? And the most honest friend, you're a fine writer. It's just now we know what you and your husband do in bed. Okay. Yes. Yes, Anthony?
I have to say something to that real quick. So I have a lot of close friends, even my wife. The two people that I share my erotic poetry with are right here, like in this presentation. I don't share them with my close friends because that's not the place that we share stuff in common. These are the people I share that in common with. So you gotta know who your audience is.
Yeah. And I guess this goes to what we were saying earlier, like sometimes the people close to you need to know that when you're writing poetry or you're writing fiction, it's not necessarily about you. It's just something you wrote, so that happens. So yes, maybe sometimes we need to be cautious who, from our real life, who do we share with? Or if we're going to share, say, okay, this is something I wrote. This is not me. Okay, it's fiction. It's just something I felt inspired to write about. So yeah. And let's see. I see comments. They agree with the safety around a pen name. And for some of us, that's going to be the solution to the problem. Let me see. Boy, listener. Martin Flower is asking, do you mention people by name in poems? Lindsay?
I don't think in any sort of, love poem or anything like that. I mean, maybe the odd poem where I've written about my own children, in my recent book on motherhood, maybe I shared a name here and there if it was meaningful and significance, but only in that kind of way.
Okay. And Anthony?
No, I always create like titles, like these really big titles, and they're usually like the name of the poem of the person, the goddess of the moon and things like that to really personify that muse, but I never use real names.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I usually use no names either, just a man, a woman, my loved one, but never names. Yeah. Okay, we are almost running out of time. So very quickly, Lindsay, where can people find more about you?
Yes, you can please check out my website at lindsaysobrano.com and help support me build up my TikTok following too at Poetry Matters. Thank you.
Yes, Anthony?
Unmute.
Sorry, I was trying to put the banner up too. I'm on iPoetry. I stopped all my social media, so if you want to find me there, find me there. I'd love to read your work. Come join us at iPoetry. You'll see the link here in just a second where you can go, and turn it back to you, Gabby.
Yes. Well, as well on Medium as GB Rogood, and on my Medium profile, you can find a link tree to all of my links all over social media. I'm in too many platforms, I think. Well, you can find me there. And of course on Twitter as GB Rogood. And yeah, please, if you feel like it, we would love to have you on iPoetry. We are growing. We are trying to do better, and we would love to have you there. And thank you very much to everybody for being here, Lindsay, Anthony, and to everybody who was on the chat and just for watching and spending a little bit of time with us. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Okay. Thank you. Bye bye.